Okay, so we can add an attendee when we create an activity, but of course we want to allow users to sign up or cancel their place on events. And what we'll also do at the same time is if the user is the host of an event, then we don't want them to be able to remove themselves from the event, but rather we're going to allow them to cancel the activity itself. And what this means is that we need another property on our activity to allow us to do this. So a couple of things to do in here. What we'll need to do is go to our activity entity, and we need another property for whether or not this is cancelled. So we'll add a boolean and say is cancelled. And we'll also need to add this to our activity DTO as well. And we'll just add it inside here as well. But what this also means is that we do need to add a new migration for this. So let's just go ahead and stop our application. We'll just cd up to the solution level, and we'll just say .NET EF migrations add, and we'll just say add cancelled property, and we'll specify -p and persistence and -s and API, press return, so that we get this property added to our activity table. And we should have no issues with that, and just give the migration a quick double check to make sure this is what you're expecting. It's always a good idea to check this, even if it is something as simple as adding a property. And that's fine. And what we want to do now is add a new handler for attendance. And what we'll do is we'll create a new C# class. We'll call this update attendance, even though it's going to have 3 different purposes. If it's a user that's just going to an event, they're not the host, and we hit this handler, it's going to remove them from the activity. If they're not going to the event, then it's going to join them to the activity. And if they're the host, then it's going to cancel the activity. That's what we're going to do inside this particular handler. So what we'll do, this is going to be a command. So we'll say public class and command, and we'll say iRequest, and we're going to return a result of type unit. We're not going to return anything, in other words, from this request. So we'll bring in what we need. We need using mediator, and we're going to need our result object in from application core as well. And the property we need here is the GUID of the activity ID. So we'll just say GUID and ID, and we'll bring in system to make sure that we can use the GUID. And then what we'll do is we'll create the handler. So we'll say public class handler, and this is going to be an iRequest handler, and we'll pass in the command and the result of type units. And a small typo here, and then we can go ahead and implement this interface. And we'll need to add a constructor for our handler. And what do we need? Well, we need to know the user that's making this request. So we're going to need to get the username, and of course we need access to our data context as well. So we'll pass in data context, call it context, and our iUser accessor, and call it user accessor. And let's just bring in using persistence, and we'll bring in using application interfaces, and we'll just initialize the fields from parameter for both of these. And then we deal with the logic inside here. So it's going to be an async task. And the first thing we need to do is go and get the activity that we're working with. So we're going to say var activity equals await and context dot activities. And we're going to need to include here, we're going to need to eagerly load the attendees as well as the len include for the app user as well. So we'll say a goes to a dot attendees, and then we'll say len include, and say u goes to u dot app user. And then we can say first or default async, and we'll say x goes to x dot id is equal to the request dot id. And this gives us our activity. By the way, of course, there's different options for going to get an entity in Entity Framework. You can also use single or default async as well. The only difference between first or default or single or default is that if there's more than one entity that matches this request ID, then this one will return an exception. First or default does not return an exception, it simply returns null. If it's not found, or if there's more than one entity with the same ID, then it's just going to return the first one it comes across. Single is going to make sure that there's no duplicate IDs inside your database. Either one works fine for what we're doing here though. We'll check to see if we've got the activity. So if the activity equals null, then we're going to return null, which will result in a 404 not found being sent back to the client. Then we need to go and get our user. So we'll say var user equals await and context and users, and we'll say first or default async, and then we'll say x goes to x dot username. That's equal to the user accessor and get username method. And let's bring some of this down. And we should check to see if we've got the user here. So if the user equals null, then we're going to return null again. So what we'll also do for convenience is we'll just populate the host username of the activity in a variable, and we'll go to our activity.attendees, and we'll say first or default. This is not an async method because we've already got the activity as well as the attendees in memory at this stage from this method. And what we'll do is we'll just say x goes to x dot is host, and then we'll get the username or the app user dot username. Now we'll be slightly defensive here as well, and we'll add the optional chaining onto both the is host and the app user. And really that's just temporary because a lot of our activities do not have this at the moment. But it doesn't hurt to be defensive. And what we'll do then is we'll get the attendance status for this particular user. So we'll say var attendance equals, and we'll say activity.attendees first or default, and we'll say x goes to x dot app user dot username. That's equal to the user dot username. And then we can add the logic to decide what we're going to do based on the attendance and the host username. So what we'll do first is check to see if the attendance is not equal to null and the host username is equal to the user.username. And if this is the case, then the user that's making this request is the host, and we want to set the activity flag to cancelled. Or rather, we'll use this as a toggle, so we'll set it to the opposite of what it already is. So we'll say activity is cancelled equals exclamation mark activity dot is cancelled. And we'll add an X condition, and we'll check to see if the attendance is not equal to null, and the host username is not equal to the user.username. This means they're just a normal attendee, and what we're going to do is remove them from the attendees list. So what we'll do is we'll say activity.attendees.remove and the attendance. And finally, we'll check to see if the attendance is equal to null. And if it is, then we're going to need to create a new attendance object or a new attendee object and set the properties in there. So what we'll do is we'll say attendance is equal to new activity attendee, and we'll need to bring in using domain. And then we'll set the properties. So we'll set the app user equal to user, we'll set the activity equal to activity, and because this is going to be a normal attendee, we'll set the is host flag equal to false. And then we can say activity.attendees.add and pass in the attendee, or attendance, I should say. Now, all of this is going on in memory. Nothing has happened to our database at this point. So what we need to do then is say var result equals await context.savechanges async, and we'll use the greater than 0. And then we can return the result, and we'll use a ternary here, and if the result is true, then we're going to return result of type unit dot success and pass in unit dot value. And if it's not success, then we're going to return result of type unit dot failure, and we'll just add a message saying problem updating attendance. So with this in place, we'll go back to our activities controller and we'll just add a new endpoint for this functionality. And we'll make this an HTTP post. And we'll specify quote marks, curly brackets, and the ID. And then we'll say /attend. Even though this could be used for cancelling the activity as well. And then we'll say public async task. And we're going to return an iAction result. And we'll call it attend. And we'll take in the GUID of the ID of the activity. And we'll return, and we'll say handle result, and we'll say await mediator dot send, and then we'll pass in a new update attendance dot command, and we'll set the ID equal to the ID. Phew, a long method, but let's make sure that we can make use of it, and we'll head back to Postman, and we've got another request here to log in as Tom, and if we take a look at the tests, inside here we're going to set the Tom's token to Tom_token. So let's go ahead and log in as Tom so we get that in our environment variables. And of course I need to restart my API. So a slight detour back to the terminal and we'll say .NET watch run. And once we're up and running, we'll go back and we'll send that request once again, and now we've got a token for Tom that's stored in our environment variables. And let's see, we've got two requests here, update attendance as Bob and update attendance as Tom. And if we go back to the get activity that Bob is hosting and click send, make sure we get all of the information back. And we'll use this ID and copy this into the clipboard, and we'll click on the update attendance as Tom. If we look at the headers, then we can see that this is using Tom_token. And we just need to overwrite the ID of the activity and then click send. And I'm missing a / in between the 7 and attend, hence the reason for the 405 method not allowed. Let's try that one more time. And we get a status of 200 OK. If I go back to get the activity details once again, click send, then we should see Tom also as an attendee here. And if I go back and say update attendance as Tom once again, click send, and go back to get the activity details and click send again, Tom should be removed from that list. That's good. And then if I go to the cancel activity by host, and let's just paste in the GUID once again for this activity, and this time in the header we're sending up the token, and this is the event that Bob is hosting. So if I click send, then this should cancel the activity, and if I go and get the activity once again, then we should see is cancelled being updated to true, and we do. And if I do the same thing again, and instead of cancelling it, we're going to reactivate it this time, and go once again and get the activity, then we should see it's back to false for the is cancelled flag, and we've now got this functionality in place.